This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The Taliban inches closer to forming a new government as fighting rages in Panjshir Valley. The shipping of Johnson & Johnson vaccines from South Africa to Europe is halted. And more than 40 people killed as the remnants of Hurricane Ida swamp northeastern United States. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour. In business, Nigeria's crude oil production falls to a 5-year low in August. And in sports, new South Africa coach Hugo Broos eyeing to get the team to Qatar for the 2022 FIFA World Cup. We begin in Afghanistan, where the Taliban is expected to announce a new government soon. Unconfirmed reports say Taliban co-founder Mullah Baradar will lead a new Afghan government. Baradar, who heads the Taliban's political office, is expected to be joined by Mullah Muhammad Yaqub and Sher Mohammad Abbas Stanaksky, who will take senior positions. Meanwhile, heavy fighting has reignited between the Taliban and opposition fighters in the Panjshir Valley to the north of Kabul. A humanitarian crisis is worsening after the United States froze Afghanistan's funds and access to international finance. Well, let's go live now to Kabul for the very latest developments. We're joined by Zamarlai Abbasin standing by for us. Zamarlai, all eyes on the Taliban ahead of the naming of a new government. What is the latest?
Hello. The government formation was supposed to be taking place today, but according to Taliban spokesperson Zabiullah Mujahid, they were getting prepared for the announcement, but yet it's early because there are some issues which he didn't mention about the government. But according to the sources, the Taliban have been engaged in the dialogue with their leaders, with also politicians like former President Hamid Karzai and others, and also the regional and international society is also important. While on the other hand, the Panjshir Valley issue is not solved, there are heavy clashes between both sides, and that also one of those issues that is now avoiding the announcement of the new government. Yet, one thing is very much clear, that Mullah Hibatullah Akhundzada, supreme leader of Taliban, will be leading the upcoming new government. And how and abouts of this government is not clear yet. Whether some sources report that there will be a government that Mullah Hibatullah will lead, there is no doubt. But the rest, who will be the deputies and how the structure of the new government will look like, is uncertain and unclear, because the Taliban haven't announced this, and also till we have engagement with them and all the sources that we have talked about, they are not affirming the recent reports that the structures is announced by Reuters or somebody else. So we have to wait, and this is now very close to be forming a new government in Afghanistan.
Well, Zamarlai, just tell us a little bit more about those clashes that have been reported in Panjshir province. Just tell us who is behind these clashes and the scale of the fighting at the moment.
The fighting between Taliban and the resistance or anti-Taliban forces intensified till last night. The Taliban brought very heavy artillery out there to Panjshir and Gulbahar gate, which is main gate of Panjshir Valley. Also Andarabs from Baghlan province, Badakhshan province, and also Kapisa province. This is a surrounding scenario. In some parts, according to the sources, Taliban had progresses, and they are already entered to some parts, and some very strategic and hard geography of Panjshir Valley. While on the other hand, the resistance force spokesperson Fahim Dashti said that the clashes were very much heavy for the Taliban, and the Taliban paid a very high price and casualties for this attacks, and they will continue doing so. And also, the Taliban sources say they are already entered to Panjshir province and also took at least 8 checkpoints in Shotal district of Panjshir, which is a very hard reach area also. And the surrounded areas, there are reported that no communication, no internet, and the situation is really tough. Heavy clashes continue at the moment, and the Taliban have decided that they will end Panjshir Valley and they will finalize this issue. We were waiting because the sources who are out there in the Panjshir or closest to this by the Taliban, they were telling us that afternoon the issues will be solved. But it seems like the Taliban are not able to this moment to enter Panjshir Valley. Panjshir is a historical and very strategic place of Afghanistan, a tiny area, yet remained out of access of the Taliban and uncontrollable, and the resistant force and their commanders are inside the valley, while there are also reports that they are very much under pressure and the case will be solved very much soon.
Well, thank you so much. Zamar Alai Abbasin joining us there live from Kabul. Well, China says it hopes all parties in Afghanistan can resolve their differences through negotiation to help ensure a smooth transition of power in the country.
China sincerely hopes all parties in Afghanistan will follow the will of the people, as well as to be aware of the hopes of the international community. To ensure a peaceful transition of power, it is necessary to solve differences through negotiation. Only then can the residents of war-torn Afghanistan recover from chaos and a lasting peace be reached.
Meanwhile, a Chinese assistant foreign minister has held talks with a Taliban official over the phone. Wu Jianghao on Thursday spoke with the deputy head of the Taliban's political office in Qatar, Abdul Salam Hanafi. They discussed the situation in Afghanistan. Wu said China respects the country's sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity. Hanafi said the Taliban will work to ensure the safety and security of Chinese personnel and organizations in Afghanistan. He also said Afghanistan hopes to continue cooperation with China. He cited regional development within the Belt and Road Initiative. Well, EU foreign ministers have discussed how to engage with the Taliban. Thursday's debate on Afghanistan also touched on humanitarian aid to Afghan refugees. Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell said the purpose of the meeting was to reach an agreement on cooperation with the Taliban, but it does not mean recognition of the new government. Germany's Heiko Maas stressed the need to set conditions such as the protection of human rights and women's rights. Luxembourg's Jean Asselborn said the Taliban must be aware that the country needed international assistance and Europe should not limit the number of refugees. Many countries, however, opposed his views. Well, tens of thousands of Afghans are currently struggling to leave their country after the departure of foreign forces. Many refugees have fled to Europe or other Asian countries and even a few to Africa. However, Afghans are not the only refugees from Asia to have found domicile in Africa in recent years. Yasser Hakim looks at how refugees from Syria are finding life in Egypt.
Sheher Rajoub is spending some fun time with friends in Cairo after a hectic day at work. A former journalist, he had fled the war in Syria via a road and boat trip to Egypt with his mother and brother in 2013.
We chose Egypt because they like Syrians. There's a unity between the two peoples, and there's a similarity in the way of living. The Egyptians welcomed us, and we settled in quickly.
Sheher has made good use of his time in Egypt.
I used to work in media. Here, I've established an agency to film events, weddings, and advertisements. On the side, I'm a real estate agent. With my good relations with traders, I also provide job opportunities for about 20 or more Syrians a month so that they can have a source of income in order to live dignified lives.
According to Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi in April 2021, Egypt hosts about 6 million refugees. Syrians are over 500,000, but there are no refugee camps, as the North African country merges refugees within the community.
Some of them are living in a good standard of living because I'm aware that some have their own apartment in the 6th of October or in the Rahab. Some of them are suffering in a condition which is not excellent. They are receiving support from the international community, from IOM, and from the Egyptian Red Crescent. And of course, Egypt is facilitating the services provided to them coming from such entities.
The North African country allows refugees to own a home, set up a business, buy land, and can enroll children in schools like any Egyptian. Taysir al-Najjar, a refugee himself, has established a charity organization to assist Syrians in the relocation process. Taysir says one main challenge is applying for residency.
The ones who have children enrolled in schools or own houses and big businesses are allowed residency, but others are not. The problem is we cannot travel to see our family members and they can't come to visit. It's a problem I face personally, as my wife and children are in Saudi Arabia. We are far apart. Egypt is still a good place to live, a good place to have as home, especially since the people accept us. They are welcoming and gracious.
And Shahir agrees, but although he's settled down and has a successful business and life, this is never enough.
My country and my home is Syria. My dream is to return to my country. This is the dream of every Syrian. We pray for God to bring peace to Syria so that we can go back home and that the war ends.
And he's living by, hoping one day his dream comes true. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
And turning now to news from Ethiopia, the United Nations is warning of a deteriorating humanitarian situation in Ethiopia's war-torn Tigray region. The UN Agency for Humanitarian Affairs says Tigray is facing a severe shortage of aid, cash and fuel, and that UN partners have run out of food stocks for distribution. It says trucks have not been able to enter Tigray for over a week now, since August 22nd. Conflict broke out in November last year between the Ethiopian army and the Tigray People's Liberation Front, which controls the region of some 6 million people. Fighting has left thousands dead and hundreds of thousands on the brink of famine. On to the latest now on the coronavirus pandemic on the African continent. An arrangement in which Johnson & Johnson was packaging COVID-19 vaccines in South Africa and later shipping those doses to Europe has now been suspended. While announcing the suspension, African Union envoy Strive Masiwa said all vaccines packaged by Johnson & Johnson's South Africa partner Aspen and which were already sent to Europe would now be returned. The arrangement between the two pharmaceutical companies had drawn criticism on the continent since Europe has very high vaccination rates while most people in Africa are yet to be vaccinated. Well, the president of the South African Communist Party, who is also the country's Minister for Higher Education, Science and Technology, says the U.S. must not make political attacks regarding the origin tracings of COVID-19. This follows the release of a report that claims China continues to hinder global investigations and resist information sharing.
As South Africa, we support the tracing of the origins of COVID-19. It is our duty to do so as the world globally so that we are able to prevent such from occurring again. But what we are emphasizing is that such an exercise must be done collectively and cooperatively by the world as a whole, and must not be used for narrow political agendas, as we feel that the United States seems to want to use this as a basis to attack China, as a basis to discredit China, and as a basis for the United States to try and fight what it sees as a growing and powerful China.
Well, time now for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on Africa Live. Coming up, more than 40 people killed as the remnants of Hurricane Ida swamp northeastern United States. And more than 130 rhinos killed this year in South Africa's Kruger National Park. Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climate and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories. Let's have a look. We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice. Large parts of the northeastern United States are under a state of emergency after the remnants of Hurricane Ida drenched the region with record rainfall. The storm flooded subway stations, highways and homes and killed more than 40 people across 3 states. John Terrett has more from New York.
Never before has America's National Weather Service issued a flash flood warning for New York City. It did on Wednesday as the remnants of Hurricane Ida that slammed into Louisiana on Sunday passed overhead.
We deal with the immediate crisis. It's not quite over, but we're getting there. We remediate to protect life and property.
Shocking cell phone footage from within the subway system shows water cascading downstairs from the street above. New York is all concrete and the water has only one place to go, the railway tracks. Some passengers were trapped for hours in subway cars, others had to stand on seats to stay dry. In Central Park, 3 inches of rain fell in one 24-hour period. The area received 1 month's worth of rain in just one day. The number of dead has been steadily rising throughout the day.
What we've got to recognize is the suddenness, the brutality of storms now. It is different. A record set 2 weeks ago, another record set now, rainfall like we haven't seen ever before. This is the biggest wake-up call we could possibly get.
In nearby New Jersey, the rainfall totals were even higher, some reported at 11 inches in places. In the suburbs, there's been flooding on a scale that no one can remember seeing before. Rivers burst their banks, homes were submerged, there was traffic chaos, cars abandoned where they stopped. People were ordered to stay at home with only emergency vehicles allowed on the roads. All train services, New Jersey Transit, the Long Island Railroad and Metro North, were either cancelled or severely curtailed. President Biden also commenting on Ida's path, saying the nation is here to help.
There's a lot of damage, and I made clear to the governors that my team at the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, is on the ground and ready to provide all the assistance that's needed.
And the flooding is not expected to subside anytime soon. The forecasters say though the rains have gone, rivers are likely to go on overtopping their banks for several days to come. John Terrett, CGTN, New York.
Staying in the U.S., President Joe Biden has come out strongly against the Supreme Court's decision not to block a restrictive abortion law in Texas. He called it an unprecedented assault on a woman's constitutional rights. Clinics in the state have stopped providing abortions for women who are at least 6 weeks pregnant, and right-to-life groups have begun soliciting anonymous tips to enforce the law. Caroline Malone reports.
People who support women's rights say the clock has been turned back 50 years with a new ultra-strict abortion law in Texas. The law bans all abortions beyond 6 weeks of pregnancy with no exception for rape or incest.
This bill bans abortion for people with regular menstrual cycles only 2 weeks after a missed period, but far, far before many people know that they're even pregnant. So they are not allowed to even make a full list of choices because they have already had this restriction put on them.
According to the American Civil Liberties Union, up to 90% of women who previously obtained abortions in Texas were at least 6 weeks pregnant, meaning the law effectively bans most abortions in the state. Texas Republican Governor Greg Abbott signed the measure into law this past May.
In Texas, we work to save those lives.
It allows the public, not government officials, to sue people who perform abortions or anyone providing or assisting a woman seeking an abortion with an incentive to receive at least $10,000 if they succeed in a lawsuit. The US Supreme Court struck down an emergency request to block the law on Wednesday, banning most abortions. It was a split decision, 5-4, with the views of the more conservative justices outweighing the moderate and liberal ones. The decision delivers a blow to Roe v. Wade, a landmark ruling made nearly half a century ago that found state laws banning abortions are unconstitutional. President Biden released a statement on Thursday saying the Supreme Court ruling is an unprecedented assault on women's constitutional rights. He's directed the government and Department of Justice to look into what steps can be taken to allow women in Texas to have safe abortion access.
Our focus and the president's focus is to reiterate our deep commitment to the constitutional right, of course, established by Roe v. Wade nearly 5 decades ago, and to continue to call for the codification of Roe.
Abortion clinics are being monitored in Texas, with many procedures already cancelled. For now, reproductive and women's rights groups say the new law is going to force women to travel out of state, especially difficult during the COVID-19 pandemic, assuming they can afford to. Caroline Malone, CGTN, Washington.
China has been calling for common prosperity, which means easing inequality and giving all citizens a fair shot at creating wealth. Beijing has also said this policy does not mean killing the rich to help the poor. However, investors remain confused about the policy's implications. Our reporter Yang Shanshan talked to Robin Xing, the chief China economist of Morgan Stanley, to discuss what the policy really means.
China recently proposed a policy guideline that is to promote common prosperity. What does this mean to individuals and business?
Well, broadly speaking, we believe that policymakers' goal of common prosperity focus on the challenges of rising income inequality. Significantly, this parallels the unfolding policy shift in some other part of the world, like in the US, although with different approaches and starting points. While this challenge should not be coming at a surprise, since income inequality is a global phenomenon, but the speed, the scale, and the intensity of the measures we are seeing in China today are very unique. To take a step back, from a macroeconomic perspective, common prosperity is consistent with rebalancing China's economy towards consumption. In the early phase of China's modern economic development, the most pressing need was to create employment opportunities to meet a sharp and sustained rise in China's working age population. To address this, policymakers took the approach of incentivizing investment, especially in the manufacturing sector. Costs for a wide variety of inputs across land, labor, capital, and energy were kept low, while growth took basically the priority over the environmental impact or other issues. That result was a rise in the ratio of investment to GDP from 24% in 1990s to 42% right now, which also catalyzed a period of fast-paced GDP growth, in the process lifting hundreds of millions out of poverty. So that was the last 2 decades. But the economic development has now reached a critical juncture. Per capita income is on the journey to crossing the high income threshold. But the distribution of household incomes has become markedly uneven. The most pressing need today is to address income inequality and raise the share of wages in GDP to support the long-standing goal of rebalancing the economy towards consumption. So with a wage share of only 50% of GDP and the relatively high levels of precautionary saving, given the limited access to healthcare, education, and housing, especially for, say, migrant workers, the proportion of private consumption in GDP is naturally limited. And raising the share of household incomes in GDP and reducing inequality while tackling the three big mountains, like escalating healthcare, education, and housing costs, should support a higher share of private consumption. So that is what the common prosperity is about, rebalancing the economy in favor of labor, in favor of consumption.
China's finance industry is backed by artificial intelligence, big data and cloud computing. Corporate credit information that was once hard to come by is now easily accessible for banks, making it easier to borrow and safer to lend. Dai Kai reports.
When banks lend to businesses, they want to know if the borrower will be able to pay the money back. Digital technology can help with the decision. Lai Jun's company helps its clients with what she calls intelligent risk control.
The platform we provide, supported by blockchain, artificial intelligence and machine learning, reduces the cost of risk control and operation for our clients, most of whom are financial institutions. By doing that, we improve the efficiency of financial services for small and micro enterprises.
The company settled in Chengdu's Jiaozi FinTech DreamWorks, an incubator that works in partnership with government authorities. If Lai's company is a problem solver for financial agencies, then it is the DreamWorks that made it possible. It offers multiple channels for investment and financing.
We strive to create a broader financial center in western part of China. To achieve that, one of the things we do here is to arrange both virtual and in-person activities for investment and financing, to connect demand and supply. There are now more than 80 enterprises here that have obtained total funds of over 11 billion yuan.
Let's say you own a quality business, and if you still have trouble securing loans, that's probably because the banks think they just see one part of the story about your company, or you just don't know how many options are out there. In other words, it's information asymmetry. Chinese banking authorities have narrowed that gap by designing an online credit platform in some parts of China. What used to be hard to access is now easily available to both borrowers and lenders.
Chengdu SoTech focuses on environmental protection. After struggling to find the money needed to expand its business, a loan was approved in just 3 days. It all happened with just a few taps on a mobile app called Tianfu Credit, a platform spearheaded by the People's Bank of China.
We were told that when we pay off all the loans we borrowed via this platform, we'll have fiscal subsidies with interest at 4%. We don't usually have that much funding, so I think it really improves the situation for small and micro enterprises.
This mobile app gathers everything in one place. It includes all the data needed to show companies' ability to pay back and all the loan schemes banks have to offer.
Tianfu Credit is equipped with big data and cloud computing. It covers all bank branches with credit business in Sichuan province. Banks can see borrowers' credit records, including history of payment of taxes and utilities. It draws up a precise portrait on entrepreneurial credit, reducing the information asymmetry between banks and enterprises. Over 30,000 companies have raised more than 410 billion yuan via the platform.
Be it banking officials or finance industry insiders, it seems their efforts point to an unsaid consensus that, backed by emerging technology and comprehensive data collection of the nation's top banking authorities, financial service level in China is poised to see more progress in a new era. CGTN, Chengdu.
Despite increased efforts to save rhinos from being killed, poaching is on the rise in South Africa. Over 135 rhinos have been killed in the Kruger National Park and the surrounding protected area since the beginning of this year. The practice of dehorning, though, is gaining momentum as one measure to protect the animals. Sumitra Naidu visited the park recently to see how it's being done.
It's loud and terrifying, but the rhino needs to be in position. A tranquilizer gun is used to shoot the animal to semi-sedate it. Using a chainsaw on a rhino doesn't sound like a good idea. It's certainly not what any vet or wildlife ranger wants to do. But rhino dehorning has become a necessary practice to save the animals.
My job is just to manage the animal, make sure that the animal doesn't die, because when you knock them down, they sort of like you put them on a borderline of death and life. We sort of manage the animals, and then we cut the horn as short as possible and also take some samples. We believe that it deters poachers when they see that the horn is not complete. It's not worthwhile for their time to come and harvest the short ones.
After intense debate over ways to save the rhino, dehorning was adopted a few years ago. Sandparks began its process in 2019, but then had to stop due to COVID. The team resumed the process in March.
We started on the other side in Chokwane. At the time we started, the poaching was very high. They were getting in like almost every day.
The Kruger Park is one of the largest game reserves in Africa. It spans over 2 million hectares. Keeping poachers out is still a challenge.
We're here in the Skukuza part of the Kruger National Park, and behind me a rhino has been discovered. It was killed about 2 days ago. Investigators and the forensic team is now currently on site.
This is the adult cow, and the first one was the calf. It's presumed that they were shot. We saw some blood on our way into the crime scene, so it ran, and this is where it fell. If you look at the face, it has been hacked off, which means the horns have been taken away. The colleagues here are trying to collect as much evidence as possible to link either an individual or a gun to this particular crime scene.
There's been over 700 incursions in the park since January. Security and law enforcement is being stepped up.
We've got our Environmental Crime Investigative Unit, which is working together with the South African Police Services. What's more disturbing is that you've lost a possible 5 other rhinos because a cow has been killed. And that is why we are imploring upon the prosecution team, the NPA, that if somebody is arrested after killing a cow, the sentences must be more stiffer.
It's now a race against time to save these animals from extinction. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, in the Kruger National Park, South Africa.
Your business news up next on Africa Live. Coming up, Nigeria's crude oil production falls to a 5-year low in August. And Egypt's new smart city plans to welcome millions of residents later this year.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
In your business news, Nigeria's crude oil production fell by as much as 90,000 barrels a day to a 5-year low of 1.43 million a day in August. This comes after the country's crude oil exports also fell by 41.9% year-on-year in the first quarter of 2021. But it's not all gloom and doom for Nigeria. On Wednesday, OPEC and its allies agreed to increase oil output by 400,000 barrels per day. That decision will boost Nigeria's oil output from about 1.4 million barrels to 1.8 million barrels per day come April next year. Egypt's new administrative capital city is a model of advanced technology systems. It's being built from scratch on the outskirts of Cairo. Designed to hold 6.5 million residents, the flagship city is expected to open its gates to its first civil servants later this year.
Egypt will soon have a new capital on the outskirts of Cairo, a new city that will be a model of technological advancement, where residents will use smart cards and apps to unlock doors, make payments, and surf the web on public Wi-Fi beamed from lampposts. There will also be at least 6,000 cameras networked to monitor activity at every street, tracking pedestrians and vehicles to regulate traffic and report suspicious activity. It's the new administrative smart city.
We want our citizens through the mobile app with the new capital to manage their whole life from their mobile phones.
Located a world away from parts of the existing sprawling capital, where creaking infrastructure can mean patchy internet and phone coverage. Officials say advanced technology systems will help to reduce waste by detecting leaks and faults.
We have the most modern applications for managing, for example, a criminal case. For example, the cameras we have are not simply surveillance cameras. That camera is like a security guard that is aware and is able to file a complaint.
Authorities plan to repeat and synchronize the technology through other developments championed under President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, for whom the new city is a flagship project.
So, in the sense, why have this smart city? Well, I mean, if there is any concern in the future that people might gather in the new capital city to protest, and that the Egyptians want to have another way to deter those kind of demonstrations and or to identify who might participate, this will help them. So that it does add that effect in terms of setting a certain set of conditions when it comes to who might actually protest or demonstrate in the new capital city.
This model is being applied in all the new 14 cities that are being established. Although some Egyptians see the new capital being for a privileged elite, in a country where nearly a third of the population live below the poverty line, others see the technological boost as long overdue.
First of all, it will save time and effort. It will save all the obstacles of routine, paperwork and archiving, things like that. It will also be modern. I saw these things in Europe in the 1990s. These things are all very useful to the citizen.
Technology and communications contracts for the new capital total $640 million, which could rise to $900 million in the later phase. Officials say surveillance technology would be aimed at detecting crime and enhancing safety, and that data will be protected by the Egyptian law and international standards. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Elsewhere in Egypt, the Great Sphinx of Giza has had company once again this summer. Egypt's tourism industry has been starting a slow recovery since the beginning of the year. Although not comparable with the pre-pandemic levels, visitors are back and the industry is regaining hope.
After 18 months of travel restrictions, tourists can once again enjoy the beauty of ancient tombs in Egypt. Tourism accounts for 9% of the country's GDP, but according to the tourism ministry, less than a quarter of the usual number of tourists visited Egypt in 2020, signaling a 55% fall in GDP. The industry had already suffered from instability in the country following the 2011 political unrest. But since the beginning of this year, authorities have started to regain hope.
Tourism is starting to recover. If we look at the pyramid or the Egyptian museum, we will find a very large occupancy rate, whether from internal or external tourism. Especially after receiving Russian tourism, we began to see very large occupancy rate.
Since the beginning of the year, Egypt has welcomed 300,000 tourists every month.
By April, this figure rose to more than 500,000 a month, around 50% of visitors pre-pandemic.
We look forward in the second half of 2021, and after vaccinations began around the world, and the arrival of Russian tourism at Sharm el-Sheikh and Hakata airports, to recover a little bit until we reach the normal rates of the tourism sector.
The government is also making efforts. Tourism workers in the South Sinai and Red Sea governorates have been vaccinated. That represents about 2 million people in the country's most visited resorts. Zhang Mengyuan, CGTN.
Foreign invested financial institutions are playing an increasingly large role in China's securities markets, taking advantage of government policies, opening the domestic financial sector to foreign firms. They're also providing more opportunities to local investors. Zhang Xishuan has more.
Having been doing business in China for 14 years, Fullerton became the first Singapore-based asset management company to be granted the RMB Qualified Foreign Institutional Investor status and approved for dealing on the China interbank bond market in 2014. With its wholly foreign-owned entity in Shanghai, the company launched its first equity private fund in China in 2018. Since then, it has been offering services to not just overseas clients, but also to domestic investors. And it's been good business. Its investments have seen an annualized return rate of 14.6%, and the company is looking forward to more.
The A-share market is behaving quite reasonably, and as the Chinese economy continues to grow, listed companies have high-quality assets with large profit capabilities and potentials. And since the outbreak, China's overall monetary policy has remained relatively loose, so we're optimistic about the mainland stock market and the bond market as well.
The growing market is showing it's attractive to plenty of newcomers as well. JP Morgan has just announced that the regulator has given it the green light to take complete ownership of JP Morgan Securities China from its 4 Chinese shareholders, making it the first foreign firm to fully own a securities venture here. The company says that China represents one of the largest opportunities in the world for many of its clients and for itself, and it will also help Chinese companies grow internationally. These developments not only highlight the enthusiasm for foreign financial institutions for operating in China, but also reflect Chinese regulators' resolve to advance financial liberalization. In recent years, more than 100 foreign invested banks and insurance, securities, payment, and clearing institutions have been approved and set up here. They've been actively expanding the scope of financial businesses, especially since the Chinese government scrapped foreign ownership limits on securities firms and mutual funds last year.
We help companies with their business registration, location choices, and recruitment. We are working on spreading information about our policies so as to let overseas firms better understand us and strengthen their confidence in operating here.
Experts say the arrival of the foreign invested financial institutions will bring more diversified financial derivative products and businesses to the mainland market, accelerating its upgrading and internationalization, but at the same time potentially putting pressure on domestic firms.
Domestic firms are good at serving local firms, raising money domestically. In terms of business transactions, due to their lack of retail channels and their lower commissions, overseas firms will probably avoid competing with local firms in traditional retail business transactions and credit trading. But they will present great challenges to local firms in serving high-end or high-net-worth clients.
In the first half of this year, overseas investors increased their holdings of yuan-denominated bond by over 450 billion yuan, up 40% year-on-year. And a State Council executive meeting in July announced that China's financial liberalization will continue. Regulations on cross-border transactions between parent and subsidiary firms will be improved, and there are to be more ways opened for foreign capital to participate in domestic financial markets. Zhang Shixuan, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
That's where we leave your business news. Here's what's still ahead on Africa Live. Coming up, rising water levels threaten the iconic flamingos of Kenya's Lake Nakuru.
Join us in global business and see Africa through our eyes. The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
The island nation of Mauritius is home to some of the most pristine maritime ecosystems in the world. In July 2020, disaster struck when the Japanese carrier ship Wakashio ran aground on the reef a mile from the coast. Over the following 2 weeks, NGOs mobilized foreign aid, but then the ship broke in two, spilling an estimated 1,000 tons of fuel oil into the pristine lagoon.
Ça va prendre des années à revenir. Donc, parce que les dégâts, là, pour nous, quand on regarde, quand on va en mer, c'est irréversible.
Join us as we navigate the far-reaching ramifications, environmental, personal, and political.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Lake Nakuru has been ranked as one of the world's most colorful lakes. Its most popular attraction has been flamingos. However, in recent years, the birds had disappeared because of increasing water levels. CGTN's Wilkista Nyabwa spent a day at the park and now brings us this report about the status of the flamingos at the lake.
As the early morning chill slowly melts away, the animals at the Lake Nakuru National Park begin to stir, and another day begins in the wild. The park, a 2-hour drive from Nairobi, is home to some of the world's most majestic wildlife. But it's best known as a home for one particular type of bird. Mid-morning is the best time to spot flamingos in their numbers at the Lake Nakuru National Park. You will find them in the water foraging for the food that turns their plumage that distinctive pink. Let's go. Lake Nakuru alone was historically known for hosting more than 1% of the world's flamingo population. Pictures of thousands of flamingos feeding in or flying over the lake are among the best-known wildlife photos in the world. But these numbers have fallen greatly in recent years.
Or you can look at the cliff, and then you see where the water is at the cliff.
Joseph Edebe is a scientist working for the Kenya Wildlife Service that runs the park. He remembers the years when about 1 million flamingos could be found feeding here. A census found only about 6,000 flamingos at these shores. In the last 10 years, floods have caused water levels in the shallow lake to almost double, upsetting its fragile ecosystem. To date, the park's main gate remains submerged.
Because of the increased rainfall, we have the water chemistry changing, it dilutes, and hence there is less food for the flamingos. And the flamingos move away because they follow the food.
The flamingos often migrate to other Rift Valley lakes.
In other areas where the flamingos move between, for example, Lake Elementaita, we recorded higher numbers of flamingos, about 70,000. And Lake Bogoria, there's about almost
100,000 lesser flamingos.
Lake Nakuru is also right next to Nakuru town, a fast-growing urban center with pressing demands.
It has a highly rapidly growing population, and so it has a challenge of solid and liquid waste pollution.
Despite this, hordes of tourists from across the world continue to visit the park. In 2011, about 250,000 tourists visited the park.
I've been longing for a very long time, really, to come see nature.
I've only been seeing flamingos in the TVs, but today it has been reality. I've just seen it here right with me.
With the pandemic, these numbers have reduced. Experts believe the key to safeguarding this phenomenon lies in protecting the water catchment areas and preserving this ecosystem. Already they say the water levels are falling. It's a promising sign of things to come. The birds are a world of wonder that has defied many threats to remain afloat year after year. Wilkes Anyabo, CGTN.
Coming up in your sports news, up next.